In the middle of a blizzard, an elderly black woman lives alone in a rundown house, freezing and so desperate that she's already holding a bottle of pills, ready to end it all. At that moment, loud pounding erupts at her door. 20 Hells Angels bikers stand on her porch begging for help after an accident that left 3 of them badly injured. Terrified but compassionate, Eleanor lets them in bandages their wounds and cooks the very last soup she has. But that single act of kindness quickly turns against her. The whole town films her throws, rocks, hurls insults, and orders her to leave. Just as Eleanor twists open the pill bottle again, hundreds of motorcycles suddenly flood the town square, and her life is changed in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you more great stories. The wind hit the windows like fists. Eleanor sat by the wood stove watching the flame flicker and die. She didn't move to add more wood. What was the point? The pile outside was nearly gone, and her knees weren't what they used to be. Getting out there in this storm alone would take everything she had left. And honestly, she wasn't sure she had anything left. She pulled the old coat tighter around her shoulders. It still smelled like him. After all these years, James's scent clung to the fabric motor oil cigarettes and something warm she could never name. She buried her face in the collar and closed her eyes. "You told me to keep going," she whispered to the empty room, "but I don't know how anymore." The house creaked. The storm outside wasn't letting up. Snow piled against the door, thick and heavy. The lights had been flickering on and off for the past hour. Any minute now, they'd go out for good. Eleanor opened her eyes and stared at the far wall where a single photo hung in a crooked frame. It was taken 20 years ago, James standing beside her, one arm around her waist, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. She remembered that day. He'd fixed the truck himself, saved them $300, and bought her flowers with the money instead. "Daisies," she said aloud. "You remembered I like daisies." Her voice cracked. She let the coat slip from her shoulders and folded it carefully, like it was something sacred. Then she stood slowly, her joints protesting, and shuffled to the small kitchen. The floorboards groaned under her weight. Everything in this house was falling apart. The roof leaked. The back door didn't close right. Half the windows were drafty. But she couldn't afford to fix any of it. James had been the one who kept things running. He worked 60-hour weeks at the factory, came home covered in grease and exhaustion, and still found the energy to patch the roof or replace a broken pipe. He never complained. Not once. Until the coughing started. Eleanor gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles going white. She didn't want to think about that day. The day the doctor looked at them with pity and said words like stage 4 and maybe 6 months. The day James squeezed her hand and told her it was going to be okay, even though they both knew it wasn't. They couldn't afford treatment, not the kind that might have helped. So James stayed home, and Eleanor watched him fade. She opened the cabinet and pulled out a chipped mug. There was no coffee left, but she filled it with water from the tap and held it in both hands, letting the cold seep into her palms. "You should have had more time," she said quietly. "We should have had more time." But time didn't care about should have. James died on a Tuesday. The room had been cold, colder than it was now. Eleanor had been holding his hand, and she felt the exact moment he left. 1 second he was there, struggling to breathe, and the next, he was just gone. She'd sat with him for hours after that, not wanting to let go. When she finally did, she realized she was completely alone. The mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. Eleanor stared at the pieces scattered across the worn linoleum and didn't move to clean them up. What did it matter no one was coming? No one ever came. Except, her chest tightened. Except her son. Once. Marcus. God, she hadn't said his name out loud in 2 years. She sank into the chair by the table and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the memory from coming. But it came anyway, sharp and unforgiving. It had been 3 months after James died. Marcus had driven out to the house, looking older than she remembered. Tired. Angry. They'd argued. No, she'd said something she couldn't take back. Eleanor could still see the look on his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, not in violence, but in restraint, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. "You think it's my fault?" he'd said, his voice low and rough. "You actually think Dad died because of me?" She'd tried to explain, tried to say she didn't mean it the way it sounded, but the words had already left her mouth, and words like that didn't come back. If you hadn't argued with the doctor that day, if you'd just let him try the treatment. Marcus had stepped back like she'd slapped him. You really believe that, he said, and it wasn't a question. Eleanor had opened her mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. And Marcus left. He walked out the door, got in his truck, and drove away. She watched from the window until the taillights disappeared into the dark. That was 2 years ago. She hadn't heard from him since. Eleanor pressed her hands flat against the table, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The guilt was a living thing inside her, clawing at her ribs, squeezing her lungs. She'd destroyed the last good thing in her life. And for what? Because she needed someone to blame. Because she couldn't accept that sometimes people just die. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus, I'm so sorry. But the house didn't answer. It never did. The wind howled louder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Eleanor sat in the dark alone. She thought about James's last words to her, the way he'd looked at her even through the pain, and said, "Keep going, Ellie, no matter what. Keep going." But how? How was she supposed to keep going when every day felt like drowning? She stood slowly and walked to the bedroom. Her legs felt heavy, like she was moving through water. The room was colder than the rest of the house. The bed was unmade. She hadn't bothered in weeks. What was the point of making a bed when you were the only one sleeping in it? Eleanor opened the top drawer of the dresser. Inside, buried under old scarves and sweaters, was a small bottle of pills. She'd gotten them years ago, back when the pain in her knees was unbearable. The doctor had warned her not to take too many at once. She pulled the bottle out and held it up to the faint moonlight coming through the window. Her hands were shaking. "I'm tired, James," she said softly. "I'm so tired." She twisted the cap off. And then, bang, bang, bang. The sound came from the front door, loud and urgent. Eleanor froze. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. But then it came again, harder this time. Bang, bang, bang. Her heart stuttered in her chest. No one came out here. Especially not in a storm like this. She set the bottle down on the dresser and moved toward the door, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Who's there?" She called out, her voice thin and shaky. No answer. Just more pounding. Eleanor unlocked the door and pulled it open. The cold hit her like a wall. And standing on her porch, covered head to toe in snow, were 20 men. Bikers, leather jackets, chains, tattoos snaking up their necks and across their knuckles. The emblem on their backs read Hell's Angels in bold, unmistakable letters. Eleanor's breath caught. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her chest. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't have much, but if you need something, if you need money, just take it. Just don't hurt me." The man at the front, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the side of his face, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough but steady, "we're not here to hurt you." Eleanor's legs felt like they might give out. "Then what do you want?" The man glanced back at the others, then looked at her again. "We need help," he said, "and we were hoping maybe you could help us." Eleanor's hand trembled on the doorframe. 20 men, maybe more behind them, all staring at her through the falling snow. Her first instinct was to slam the door, lock it, hide. But something in the leader's eyes stopped her, something that didn't look like threat. It looked like desperation. "Help you," she repeated, her voice barely audible over the wind. "How could I possibly?" "We had an accident," the man interrupted gently. "About 2 miles back. 3 of our guys are hurt. We saw your light and—" He trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "We didn't know where else to go." Eleanor's eyes darted past him to the others. Sure enough, she could see 2 men supporting a third between them. Another was clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. A younger guy sat on the porch steps, his face pale and twisted in pain. "The hospital's 40 miles from here," the leader continued. "Roads are completely blocked. We can't get through." Eleanor stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to close the door. These were strangers, dangerous-looking strangers. But then her eyes caught on the injured man again, the way he was struggling to breathe, the way his friends held him up with such careful urgency. She thought of James, how he'd looked in those final months, how badly she'd wanted someone, anyone, to help. She swallowed hard. "I don't have much, just some old bandages and—" "Anything helps, ma'am." The wind howled. Snow whipped through the open door, stinging her face. Eleanor stepped back. "Come in," she said quietly. "Quickly." The men moved inside with surprising order. No pushing, no loud voices. They helped the injured ones, first settling them carefully on her worn-out couch and the floor near the dying stove. The leader was the last to enter. He closed the door behind him and nodded to her. "Thank you," he said. "Really, thank you." Eleanor didn't respond. She was already moving toward the bathroom, her mind racing. She grabbed the small first aid kit from under the sink, ancient, barely stocked, but it was something. Her hands were still shaking as she returned to the living room. The injured man on the couch was bleeding from a gash across his forehead. Another had twisted his ankle badly. It was already swelling. The third looked like he'd taken a hard hit to the ribs. Eleanor knelt beside the one with the head wound. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30. His face was covered in tattoos, but his eyes were scared. "Hold still," she murmured, pressing a clean cloth against his forehead. He winced, but didn't pull away. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't mean to bleed all over your floor." "Floors can be cleaned," Eleanor said automatically. Her hands moved on instinct, cleaning the wound, applying pressure, wrapping it with gauze. She'd done this before. James had always been getting cuts and scrapes from the factory. The room was silent except for the wind outside and the occasional hiss of pain from one of the injured men. Eleanor finished with the first man and moved to the second. As she worked, she became aware of the others watching her. Not with suspicion or malice, with something else. Gratitude. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? "You got any food, ma'am?" one of them asked quietly. "We haven't eaten since this morning." Eleanor paused. She had, half a loaf of bread, some canned soup, a few eggs. "I'll see what I can do," she said. She stood and made her way to the kitchen. Her legs felt steadier now, purposeful. She pulled out what little she had and started heating the soup on the stove. It wasn't much. It wouldn't feed 20 men, but it was something. As the soup warmed, she heard movement behind her. She turned to find one of the bikers, an older man with gray in his beard and deep lines around his eyes, standing in the doorway. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "name's Jack. I just wanted to say, what you're doing here letting us in like this. Most people wouldn't." Eleanor stirred the soup, not meeting his eyes. "Most people probably have more sense than I do." Jack let out a low chuckle. "Maybe. Or maybe you just got more heart." She didn't know what to say to that. "Can I help?" Jack asked, gesturing to the pot. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "There are bowls in that cabinet." Jack moved around the kitchen with surprising ease, pulling out bowls and setting them on the counter. Eleanor ladled soup into each one, her hands steady now. "You live out here alone?" Jack asked after a moment. Eleanor's grip tightened on the ladle. "Yes." That's hard," Jack said quietly. "Being alone." Eleanor didn't respond. She just kept pouring. Jack was silent for a moment, then added, "I lost my son 10 years ago. Overdose. Been on the road ever since. Couldn't stand being in that empty house." Eleanor's hands stilled. She looked up at him. His eyes were fixed on the bowls, but she could see the pain etched into every line of his face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Jack shrugged. "Life doesn't ask permission before it takes things from you, does it?" No, it didn't. They carried the bowls out to the living room together. The men accepted the food with quiet thanks, cradling the warm bowls in their hands like they were treasures. Eleanor watched them eat. These rough-looking men with their leather and chains and tattoos. And all she could see was how human they were, how tired, how grateful for something as simple as hot soup. While they ate, she noticed another biker, younger, maybe early 30s, standing by the broken window. He was trying to wedge a piece of cardboard into the frame to block the draft. "You don't have to do that," Eleanor said. The man turned. He had kind eyes. "It's freezing in here, ma'am. Just trying to help. I've been meaning to fix it." Eleanor lied. She hadn't been meaning to fix anything. She'd been waiting to die. The man, Miguel, she'd learn later, nodded but kept working. Within minutes, he'd patched the window. Then he moved to the back door, which had been hanging crooked on its hinges for months. He pulled out a small tool from his jacket and started tightening the screws. "You really don't have to." "I used to be a firefighter," Miguel said without looking up. "I'm used to fixing things that are about to fall apart." There was something heavy in his voice, something that made Eleanor stop protesting. She watched him work in silence. When he finished, he tested the door. It closed properly for the first time in a year. "There," he said quietly. "That should hold." "Thank you," Eleanor said. Miguel finally looked at her. "You helped us when you didn't have to." Least I can do is make sure you don't freeze tonight." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away for so long. She paused, searching for words. "I'm not used to people being kind." Miguel's expression softened. "Yeah, I know that feeling." The night deepened. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. Eleanor sat in the kitchen watching the bikers settle in. Some dozed off where they sat. Others talked in low voices. The leader, whose name she'd learned was Dutch, was checking on the injured men, making sure they were stable. Jack appeared beside her again, holding his bowl. He hadn't eaten much. "You okay?" Eleanor asked. Jack glanced at the bowl, then set it down. "My boy used to love soup like this, store-bought, nothing fancy, but he'd eat 3 bowls if I let him." Eleanor's heart squeezed. "What was his name?" "Danny." Jack's voice was rough. "He was 23 when it happened. Had his whole life ahead of him." Eleanor reached out and placed her hand over Jack's. The gesture surprised her. She hadn't touched another person in months. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved him." Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and Eleanor saw her own grief reflected back. "It never stops hurting, does it?" Jack asked. "No," Eleanor admitted. "It doesn't." They sat together in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, just shared. Two people who understood loss in a way most people never would. After a while, Jack spoke again. "You got any family kids?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "I had a son, Marcus, but we don't talk anymore." "What happened?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "I said something I shouldn't have. When my husband was dying, there was this one day at the hospital. The doctor wanted to try a new treatment, but it was expensive, experimental. Marcus argued with the doctor, said we couldn't afford it, that it wasn't worth putting his father through more pain for something that might not work." She paused, the memory burning. "James died 2 weeks later, and God help me, I blame Marcus. I told him that if he hadn't argued, maybe his father would still be alive." Jack winced. "He left that night." Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "Haven't heard from him since. That was 2 years ago. Have you tried reaching out?" "What would I say?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. "How do you apologize for telling your son he killed his father?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My boy. The last thing I said to him was that he was a disappointment. He'd asked me for money, said he was trying to get clean, needed help. I thought he was lying, thought he just wanted drug money." Jack's voice cracked. "Found out later he really was trying. He'd checked himself into a program, needed money for rent so he wouldn't lose his spot. I told him no, called him a disappointment." Eleanor looked at Jack, saw tears in his eyes. "He relapsed 3 days later," Jack continued, "overdosed that night. And the last words he ever heard from me were that I was ashamed of him." "Oh, Jack." "I've carried that for 10 years, Jack said. "Every single day I wake up and remember that I destroyed my son when he needed me most, and I can't take it back. I can't ever take it back." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her own cheeks now. "But you know what I learned?" Jack asked, his voice steadier now. "The guilt doesn't honor them. It doesn't bring them back. All it does is make sure we stop living too." Eleanor wiped at her face with shaking hands. "My husband told me to keep going," she whispered. "Right before he died, he made me promise to keep living no matter what. But I don't know how. I don't know why I should." Jack looked at her with such understanding it hurt. "Because someone out there still needs you," he said quietly, "even if you can't see it yet." Before Eleanor could respond, Miguel approached. He'd been listening from the doorway. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft. "Mind if I ask you something?" Eleanor nodded. Miguel sat down across from her. "Why'd you let us in? You don't know us. We could have been anyone." Eleanor thought about that, about standing at the door with that bottle of pills still sitting on her dresser, about how close she'd been to giving up completely. "Honestly," she said, "I think I'd already decided tonight was my last night. So what did it matter if you were dangerous? At least I could do one good thing before I went." The words hung in the air. Miguel's face changed. Jack inhaled sharply. "You were going to—" Miguel couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor looked away. "There's nothing left for me here. My husband's gone. My son hates me. I'm just taking up space." "No." Miguel's voice was firm. "No, you're not." Eleanor met his eyes. "You think fixing doors and windows is nothing," Miguel continued. "You think feeding strangers in a blizzard is nothing. Lady, you saved 3 lives tonight." You gave 20 men a place to rest when they had nowhere to go. How is that nothing?" "He's right," Jack added. "You helped us when you had every reason to turn us away." "That's not nothing, ma'am. That's everything." Eleanor felt something inside her shift. Not healing, not yet, but cracking, like ice breaking after a long winter. "I'm just one old woman," she said weakly. "And we're just a bunch of bikers," Miguel replied. "But we help each other. We look out for each other, because that's what keeps us going. Community. Purpose." He leaned forward. "You got purpose tonight, whether you see it or not." Dutch, the leader, joined them at the table. "Miguel's right. And I'll tell you something else, ma'am. Most people see us coming and lock their doors. They see the patches, the bikes, and they assume the worst. But you saw people who needed help, and you helped. That takes courage." Eleanor shook her head. "I was just brave," Dutch interrupted. "You were brave and kind. And if you really think the world doesn't need more of that, you're wrong." The room had gone quiet. All the bikers were listening now. One of the younger ones spoke up. "My mom was like you. Lived alone after my dad died. One winter she had a heart attack. Neighbor found her 3 days later. I've always wished someone had been there for her. Someone to check on her, to remind her she mattered." Another voice. "My grandma died alone too. Just gave up. Stopped eating. Stopped trying." "Mine too." "Same here." Eleanor looked around the room at these hardened men and saw nothing but raw honesty in their faces. "The world tries to make people like you invisible," Dutch said. "Older folks living alone. It's like society just forgets you exist. But you do exist, ma'am. You matter." Tonight proved that. Eleanor felt tears coming again. She tried to stop them, but they came anyway. "I don't even know your names," she said through her tears. "I don't know why you're being so kind to me." "Because you were kind to us first," Jack said simply. "And because—" He paused. "Because maybe we all needed this, to remember what goodness looks like." The night stretched on. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the small house felt warmer, not from the stove which had long since gone out, but from something else, something Eleanor had forgotten existed. Human connection. They talked for hours, about loss, about regret, about the people they'd loved and lost. Miguel told them about his family, his wife and daughter who'd died in a fire while he was on duty responding to a different call across town, about how he couldn't save them because he was too busy saving strangers. "I quit the fire department after that," Miguel said, staring at his hands. "Couldn't stand the uniform anymore. Couldn't stand myself. Joined the club a year later. These guys saved my life." "How?" Eleanor asked. "Gave me a reason to keep waking up," Miguel said. "Showed me I could still help people, still make a difference, just in a different way." Dutch spoke about his daughter, the one they'd been traveling to help. "She needs surgery, heart condition. We've been raising money for months. Every run we do, every charity event, it's all for her." "That's where we were headed tonight," Jack added, "to deliver the money we'd raised. But then the storm hit." "We'll get there," Dutch said firmly. "Once this clears, we'll get there." Eleanor looked at these men, these supposed outlaws, and saw nothing but father's sons' brothers, people who'd been broken and put themselves back together, people who'd chosen to help others instead of giving up. "You're good men," she said quietly. Dutch smiled. "We try to be. Don't always succeed, but we try." One of the younger bikers, barely 20, raised his hand awkwardly. "Ma'am, can I ask, what keeps you going like before tonight?" Eleanor thought about that. "Honestly," she said, "nothing. I've just been existing, waiting for it to be over." The young man nodded slowly. "My uncle was like that. After my aunt died, he just stopped caring about anything. We tried to help, but he wouldn't let us. Said he didn't deserve to be happy." "That's exactly how I feel," Eleanor admitted. "He killed himself last year," the young man said quietly, "and I just keep thinking, if someone had gotten through to him, if he'd let someone in, maybe—" Eleanor's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Me too." The young man looked at her with desperate eyes. "But ma'am, please don't give up, because we need people like you, people who help strangers in the middle of a blizzard, people who see past the leather and the tattoos and just see people." Eleanor couldn't speak. She just nodded. Dutch stood. "It's late. We should let you rest, ma'am. We'll head out at first light." "You can stay," Eleanor said quickly. "It's still storming. You can stay as long as you need. We don't want to impose—" "You're not." Eleanor surprised herself with how much she meant it. "Please, stay. Dutch exchanged glances with the others, then nodded. All right, thank you. They settled in for the night, some on the floor, some in chairs. Eleanor offered her bed to the injured ones, but they refused, so she brought out every blanket she had and distributed them. Before she retreated to her room, Jack stopped her. Ma'am, he said quietly, that thing you were planning tonight, before we showed up. Eleanor froze. Don't do it, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Please, the world's already lost too many good people. Don't let it lose you too. Eleanor looked at this man who'd lost his son, who carried guilt like a weight on his back, and saw her own pain reflected. I'll try, she whispered. That's all any of us can do, Jack said. Just try. Eleanor went to her room. The pill bottle was still sitting on the dresser where she'd left it. She picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, then put it back in the drawer. Not tonight. Tonight she'd just try to sleep. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and the quiet sounds of 20 men trying to rest in her living room. Every now and then she heard a cough or someone shifting position. Once she heard low voices, two of the bikers talking in whispers. Around 3 in the morning she gave up and got out of bed. The house was dark except for the moonlight coming through the windows. The storm had finally started to ease. Eleanor moved quietly through the hallway and into the kitchen. Someone was already there. Dutch sat at the table, a cup of water in his hands. He looked up when she entered. Couldn't sleep either, he asked softly. Eleanor shook her head and sat down across from him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Your daughter, Eleanor said eventually. The one who needs surgery. How old is she? 8. Dutch's face softened. Mia, smartest kid you'd ever meet. Loves science. Wants to be an astronaut. That's wonderful. Yeah. Dutch smiled, but it was edged with worry. If we can keep her alive long enough to grow up. Eleanor's heart ached. The surgery will help. Should fix the problem completely. But it's expensive. Really expensive. Insurance won't cover it because they're calling it experimental. Dutch's jaw tightened. Seems like insurance never covers what you actually need. No, Eleanor agreed, thinking of James. It doesn't. We've raised almost enough, Dutch continued. Another month or two and we'll have it. But, he trailed off. But she might not have another month or two. Yea, Eleanor wished she had money to give, but she had nothing. Just this falling apart house and a handful of canned goods. I'm sorry I can't help more, she said. Dutch looked at her with genuine warmth. Ma'am, you've already helped more than you know. You gave my guys a safe place tonight. You patched them up, fed them, treated them like human beings. That's more than most people would do. It was the bare minimum. The bare minimum is what most people don't even bother with anymore. Dutch leaned forward. You know what I think? I think you're the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. And I think you've forgotten that about yourself. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. My husband used to say that, she whispered. He used to tell me I had a gift for making people feel seen. He was right. I don't feel like I have any gifts anymore. I just feel tired. Dutch nodded slowly. I get that. God knows I get that. But here's the thing, ma'am. You're still here. You're still breathing. And that means you still have time to matter. I don't know how to matter when no one needs me. We needed you tonight. That's different. That was just what? Dutch interrupted. Just saving lives. Just showing kindness. Just being the difference between my guys freezing to death on the side of the road and making it through the night. He shook his head. Don't diminish what you did. Eleanor was quiet. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as worthless as a burden that she didn't know how to accept this. Can I tell you something? Dutch asked. Of course. Before I had Mia, I was in a bad place. Real bad. I'd gotten out of the military, couldn't adjust to civilian life, didn't have a purpose anymore, started drinking, started getting into fights, was heading nowhere good. He paused. Then I met Mia's mom. She was this amazing woman who somehow saw something in me worth saving, got me to join the club, got me to stop drinking, gave me a reason to be better. What happened to her? She died when Mia was 2. Complications from diabetes that we didn't know she had. Dutch's voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear the grief underneath. Came home one day and found her on the floor. Gone. I'm so sorry. I was going to follow her, Dutch said quietly. Planned it all out. Was going to make sure Mia was taken care of, and then... He made a gesture. But then I looked at my daughter, 2 years old, already lost her mother, And I realized I couldn't take her father away too. I had to stay. For her. Eleanor felt tears on her face. That's what you've got to find, Dutch said, his eyes meeting hers. A reason to stay. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough. I don't have anyone, Eleanor whispered. You have yourself, Dutch replied, and sometimes that has to be enough. It doesn't feel like enough. I know. But ma'am, you don't have to figure it all out tonight. You just have to make it to tomorrow. And then the day after that. One day at a time. Eleanor wiped at her eyes. That's what my husband said. Take it one day at a time. He sounds like he was a smart man. He was. Eleanor smiled through her tears. He really was. They sat together until the first hints of dawn started creeping through the windows. By the time the sun was up, the storm had passed. The world outside was buried in snow, but the sky was clear. The bikers began to stir. Dutch stood and stretched, then helped the others prepare to leave. They moved efficiently, cleaning up after themselves, making sure the house was in better shape than when they'd arrived. Miguel had fixed the door. Jack had patched 2 other windows. Someone had even restacked the firewood outside and covered it with a tarp. Eleanor stood in the doorway watching them work and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. As they were getting ready to go, Eleanor remembered something. She hurried to her bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, wrapped in tissue paper, was a stuffed bear she'd made years ago. She'd intended to give it to Marcus when he had children, but Marcus was gone. And this little girl, Mia, needed surgery. Eleanor brought the bear out to the living room. It wasn't much, just fabric and stuffing and careful stitches, but she'd made it with love. Dutch, she called. He turned. Eleanor held out the bear. For your daughter, to keep her company. Dutch stared at the bear, then at Eleanor. His eyes were suddenly bright. Ma'am, I can't. Please, Eleanor said. I want her to have it. Dutch took the bear carefully like it was something precious. Thank you. She'll love it. Tell her. Eleanor paused. Tell her to be brave. Tell her there are people rooting for her. I will. Dutch's voice was rough. The bikers filed out one by one, each of them stopping to thank Eleanor. Jack hugged her a brief, careful embrace. Remember what I said, he murmured. Someone out there needs you. I'll try to remember. Miguel was last. You fixed us up good, ma'am. Now, you fix yourself up too, okay? Eleanor nodded, and then they were gone, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the distance. Eleanor stood alone in her house. It was quiet again, empty again, but somehow it felt less empty than before. She walked through the rooms, noticing all the small repairs they'd done. The fixed door, the patched windows, the restacked wood. They'd left her house better than they'd found it, and maybe, just maybe, they'd left her better too. Eleanor picked up the photo of James from the wall. She looked at his smiling face, his arm around her waist. I'm still here, she whispered. I don't know why, but I'm still here. The photo didn't answer. But for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was treading water, and that was something. 3 days passed. Eleanor went about her routine such as it was. She ate small meals. She sat by the window. She thought about the bikers and wondered if they'd made it to their destination. She wondered if little Mia would like the bear. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find a young man standing on her porch. He couldn't have been more than 22. Clean cut. Nervous. Ma'am, he said. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you should see this. He held out his phone. Eleanor took it confused. On the screen was a video. It took her a moment to realize what she was looking at. Her house, the motorcycles, the bikers leaving. Where did you get this? Eleanor asked. It's everywhere, the young man said. Mrs. Parker posted it on Facebook. Said you were harboring criminals. Said you were... Well, she said a lot of things. Eleanor's hand started shaking. Can I delete it for you? The young man asked gently. I mean, it's already out there, but you don't have to keep seeing it. Yes, Eleanor whispered. Please. He took the phone back and deleted the video from her view. For what it's worth, ma'am, I don't believe any of what people are saying. My grandma lives alone too. If she needed help, I'd want someone to be there for her. Eleanor couldn't speak. She just nodded. The young man left. Eleanor closed the door and stood there trying to process what she'd just learned. Her phone, the old landline that barely worked, rang. She picked it up. You should be ashamed of yourself, a woman's voice said. No greeting, no introduction. Bringing gang members into our town. You're a disgrace. The line went dead. Eleanor set the phone down with trembling hands. It rang again, and again, and again. She stopped answering, but the calls kept coming. By that evening, there were people outside her house. Not many, maybe a dozen, but they were there, shouting, holding signs. "Get out! No criminals here! Leave our town!" Eleanor watched from the window, her heart pounding. She recognized some of them. Mrs. Parker Linda was at the front. Mid-40s blonde, always dressed like she was going somewhere important. She owned the general store in town. Linda was the one holding the bullhorn. "We know you're in there," she shouted. "We know what you did. You brought those thugs here. You put all of us in danger." Eleanor wanted to open the window, to explain, to tell them that those men had been hurt, that she'd just been trying to help. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, watching her neighbors turn into a mob. Someone threw something. It hit the side of the house with a dull thud. Eleanor flinched. More things flew. Rocks, empty bottles, someone's shoe. "You're not welcome here anymore," Linda screamed. Eleanor backed away from the window. She went to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed over her ears. But she could still hear them. She stayed there until it got dark and the crowd finally dispersed. When silence returned, Eleanor stood on shaking legs and went to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were hollow. Her face was gaunt. She looked like a ghost. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Official this time. Eleanor opened it to find Officer Mark Jensen standing on her porch. She'd known Mark since he was a kid. He used to mow her lawn for extra money back when James was alive. "Morning, Mrs. Eleanor," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Mark, I'm afraid I need to talk to you about what happened a few nights ago." "I helped some injured people," Eleanor said quietly. "That's what happened." "I understand that, ma'am, but—" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "There have been complaints, a lot of complaints. People are concerned about safety, about having Hell's Angels in town." "They weren't in town. They were at my house, on my property." "I know, ma'am, but what?" Eleanor felt anger rising for the first time. "I'm not allowed to help people on my own property." "It's not that simple." Mark pulled out a piece of paper. "The town council met this morning. They've asked me to deliver this. It's an order to relocate." Eleanor stared at the paper. "They're kicking me out." "It's temporary," Mark said quickly. "Just until things calm down. They're concerned about public safety and—" "I've lived here for 40 years. Eleanor interrupted, her voice breaking. "This is my home." "I know, ma'am. I'm sorry. I really am." Mark did look sorry, but not sorry enough to do anything about it. "You have 1 week to make arrangements." He left the paper in her hands and walked away. Eleanor stood in the doorway, staring at the official town seal on the document. 1 week. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table. The paper lay in front of her, the words blurring together. She'd lost James. She'd lost Marcus. And now she was losing her home. What was left, Eleanor stood and walked to her bedroom. She opened the dresser drawer. The pill bottle was still there. She picked it up, held it. This time, no one was going to knock on the door. No one was coming to save her. She was alone, just like she'd always been. Eleanor twisted the cap off the bottle. The rumble started low. At first, Eleanor thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound grew louder, closer. Engines. Dozens of them. Eleanor set the pill bottle down and moved to the window. What she saw made her heart stop. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, pouring into the town square like a flood. They came from every direction, north, south, east, west, an unstoppable wave of leather and chrome. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth. Hell's Angels! But not just 20 this time. More. So many more. The bikes filled the square, parking in perfect formation. Riders dismounted their boots, hitting the pavement in near unison. They didn't shout, didn't threaten. They just stood there, silent and immovable. And in the center of it all was Dutch. He stepped forward, and the crowd that had gathered, the same people who'd thrown rocks at Eleanor's house, fell silent. "My name is Dutch," he said, his voice carrying across the square without need for a bullhorn. 3 nights ago, my brothers and I were caught in a blizzard. We had an accident. 3 men were seriously injured. We were miles from help, and the roads were blocked." The crowd shifted nervously. "We saw a light," Dutch continued, "one single light in the darkness. We knocked on that door, not knowing what would happen. We were strangers. We looked dangerous. We had every reason to expect rejection. Linda Parker stood at the front of the crowd, her face pale. "But the woman who answered that door didn't turn us away," Dutch said. "She invited us in. She bandaged our wounds. She fed us with what little food she had. She gave us shelter from the storm." Eleanor watched from her window, tears streaming down her face. "That woman saved 3 lives that night," Dutch said. "And now I hear you're trying to drive her out. You're calling her a criminal for showing basic human kindness." "They're Hell's Angels," someone in the crowd shouted. "They're a gang." "We're a motorcycle club," Dutch corrected firmly. "We raise money for children's hospitals. We escort abuse survivors to court. We protect communities. Yes, we wear patches. Yes, we ride bikes. But we're not the monsters you think we are." He pulled something from his jacket, the stuffed bear Eleanor had given him. "This bear was made by the woman you're trying to destroy," Dutch said, holding it up. "She gave it to my 8-year-old daughter who's waiting for heart surgery. She didn't know us. She didn't owe us anything. But she gave us what she could, because that's the kind of person she is." The crowd was silent now. "You want to talk about danger?" Dutch's voice hardened. "The real danger is a community that punishes kindness, that drives out the people who actually care, that chooses fear over compassion." Miguel stepped forward, standing beside Dutch. "I was a firefighter for 10 years, he said. "I saved lives. I served this country. And 3 nights ago, an elderly woman showed me more humanity than I've felt in years. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. She just helped." Jack came forward next. "I lost my son to an overdose," he said, his voice rough. "I've spent 10 years wishing I'd been kinder to him, wishing I'd shown him the kind of grace that woman showed us. Don't make my mistake. Don't punish someone for being good." One by one, the bikers stepped forward, each telling their story, each explaining what Eleanor had meant to them. The crowd began to fracture. Some people started backing away, shame on their faces. Others stood firm, arms crossed, refusing to budge. But more and more were starting to question. Officer Jensen pushed through the crowd. "You all need to disperse. This is us telling the truth." Dutch interrupted. "That woman is being run out of town for doing the right thing. And if you let that happen, you're all complicit." Jensen hesitated. Eleanor could see the conflict on his face. "The council made their decision," he said finally. "Then the council is wrong," Dutch replied. "I don't make the rules." "But you enforce them," Miguel cut in. "You decide what kind of man you want to be, the kind who protects the innocent or the kind who drives them out." Jensen's face flushed. "I'm just doing my job." "So were the people who turned away refugees," Jack said quietly. "So were the people who looked the other way when their neighbors were persecuted. Just doing your job doesn't make it right." The crowd was fully divided now. Half were arguing with the other half. Voices rose, tempers flared, and then Eleanor's door opened. She stepped out onto her porch. The entire square went silent. Eleanor stood there in her worn dress, her gray hair pulled back, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked small, fragile, but she was there. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I just wanted to help some people who were hurt. That's all I did." Linda Parker found her voice. "You brought criminals into our town. I brought injured human beings into my home," Eleanor corrected. "And they repaired my windows. They fixed my door. They chopped firewood. They were kinder to me than most of my neighbors have been in years." "You can't trust people like that." "People like what?" Eleanor interrupted. "People who show up when someone needs help. People who give without expecting anything back. People who actually live the values the rest of you just talk about," Linda sputtered. "I've lived in this town for 40 years. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "I raised my son here. I buried my husband here. And in all that time, how many of you checked on me? How many of you noticed I was struggling? How many of you offered to help?" Silence. "But 20 strangers showed up on my doorstep, and they saw me," Eleanor said. "They saw a person who needed connection, who needed purpose, and they gave that to me. So yes, I helped them, and I'd do it again." Dutch stepped forward and extended his hand to Eleanor. She took it. He helped her down from the porch, and together they walked into the center of the square. The bikers formed a protective circle around her. "This woman is under our protection now," Dutch announced. "Anyone who has a problem with her has a problem with all of us." 1,200 bikers stood as one. The message was clear. Officer Jensen looked around at the crowd, then at the bikers, then at Eleanor. Finally, he pulled out the relocation order and tore it in half. "I'm not doing this," he said. "She hasn't broken any laws. She doesn't deserve this." Linda Parker's mouth fell open. "But the council can take it up with me," Jensen said firmly. "Mrs. Eleanor stays." The crowd began to disperse. Some people left angry, others left ashamed. But they left. Eleanor stood in the square, surrounded by people who decided she was worth protecting. "Thank you," she whispered. Dutch smiled. "You saved us first." As the crowd thinned, Eleanor noticed one biker who hadn't moved. He stood at the edge of the square helmet, still on shoulders tense. Something about his posture was familiar. Eleanor's heart skipped. The biker removed his helmet, and Eleanor's world stopped. Marcus, her son, standing right there. He looked older, harder. His face was leaner, his hair longer. But it was him. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Marcus took a step forward, then stopped, like he didn't know if he was allowed to come closer. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. Eleanor's legs went weak. Dutch caught her arm, steadying her. "You knew?" she asked Dutch. "We found out 3 days ago," Dutch said gently, "when he saw the bear." Eleanor looked at Marcus, understanding clicking into place. "You were there," she whispered, "that night. You were one of the 20. Marcus shook his head. "No, I was at the hospital with my daughter." "But," he held up his phone. "One of the guys sent me a picture of the bear, said an old woman had given it to us. I recognized the stitching." Eleanor's vision blurred. "I've been looking for you for 2 years." Marcus continued, his voice raw. "But I didn't know where you lived anymore. Didn't know if you'd moved. Didn't know if you—" He couldn't finish. "Why didn't you call?" Eleanor asked. "I tried. Your number was disconnected." Eleanor closed her eyes. She'd let the phone service lapse 6 months ago. What was the point of a phone when no one called? "I should have tried harder," Marcus said. "I should have." "God, Mom, when I saw that video of people attacking you, His voice broke completely. Eleanor moved before she could think. She crossed the distance between them and pulled her son into her arms. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal and hugged her back, lifting her slightly off the ground. "I'm sorry." Eleanor sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry for what I said. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. I thought you hated me," Marcus said through his tears. "Never. God, never. I was angry and grieving, and I said something terrible, and I've regretted it every single day since." They held each other while 1,200 bikers watched in respectful silence. Finally, they pulled apart. Marcus wiped at his face roughly. "I wanted to come back so many times, but I was scared you wouldn't want to see me." "I always wanted to see you," Eleanor said. "Always." "I have a daughter now," Marcus said. "Her name's Sarah. She's 4. I've wanted her to meet you, but I didn't know how to—" "You have a daughter." Eleanor felt her heart expand. "I'm a grandmother." Marcus nodded, smiling through his tears. "Yeah, you are. Where is she?" "With her mom, at the hospital. She's okay," he added quickly. "Just a minor procedure, but I couldn't leave her until I knew she was settled." Eleanor touched his face, still not quite believing he was real. "How did you end up with Hell's Angels?" she asked. Marcus glanced back at Dutch and the others. "After I left your place, I didn't handle things well. Started drinking, got into trouble, was heading nowhere good. Then one night I got jumped outside a bar. These guys showed up, stopped it. Dutch asked me if I wanted to keep destroying myself or if I wanted to try something different. I joined the club," Marcus continued. "They gave me structure, purpose, taught me how to channel everything I was feeling into something useful. I've been riding with them for 18 months. They're good people," Eleanor said. "The best." Marcus looked at her seriously. "Mom, I need you to know what happened with Dad. I didn't stop him from getting treatment because I didn't care. I stopped him because the doctors told me privately that the treatment had a 5% success rate and would cause him unbearable pain. They said he'd be better off spending his last weeks comfortable rather than suffering for something that probably wouldn't work." Eleanor felt like the ground was tilting. "I never knew that," she whispered. "I didn't want you to have to make that choice," Marcus said. "So I made it for you, and I've carried the guilt of that every day, wondering if I made the wrong call. If I stole time from you." "You didn't," Eleanor said firmly. "You gave him peace. You gave him comfort. That's what he would have wanted." Marcus's shoulders shook. "I've needed to hear that for so long." Eleanor pulled him close again. "You did the right thing. You took care of your father when he needed it most. I should have trusted you. I should have known you better than that." "We were both grieving." Marcus said. "We both said things we didn't mean. But I should have come after you, should have apologized sooner. I should have come back." Marcus pulled away and looked at her. Can we just start over? Right now?" Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, please." Dutch approached carefully. "We should probably clear out. Give you two some privacy." "Wait," Eleanor said. "All of you. Thank you. For everything. For protecting me. For bringing my son back." "You brought him back, ma'am," Dutch said, "with a stuffed bear and an act of kindness. We just gave him the push he needed." The bikers began mounting their motorcycles. One by one, they started their engines, a thunderous roar that shook the square. But before they left, each one stopped by Eleanor. Jack hugged her. "You take care of yourself, Mom. And remember, you matter." Miguel shook her hand. "You reminded me why I used to love helping people. Thank you." Dutch was last. "My daughter loved the bear. She hasn't let go of it since I gave it to her. Surgery's scheduled for next month. And thanks to what you did, we raised the last of the money we needed." "I'm so glad," Eleanor said. Dutch smiled. "You're a good person, Mrs. Eleanor. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." And then they were gone, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the distance. Eleanor and Marcus stood alone in the square. "Come on," Marcus said gently. "Let's go home." They sat in Eleanor's kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd fed strangers just days before. Marcus looked around, taking in the patched windows, the fixed door, all the small repairs. "They really did take care of you," he said. "They did. I'm glad you weren't alone." Eleanor made tea. It felt surreal performing this simple domestic task with her son after 2 years of silence. When she set the cups on the table, Marcus spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about those 3 days. Between seeing the bear and coming here." Eleanor waited. "I didn't sleep," Marcus said. "Not once. I just kept thinking about you, wondering if you were okay, if you were happy, if you were even alive." Eleanor flinched. "When I saw that video," Marcus continued, his voice shaking, "when I saw those people attacking you, I realized something. I'd spent 2 years being angry, being hurt, convincing myself that you were better off without me. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared that if I came back, you'd confirm what I already believed, that I'd killed my father." "Marcus, let me finish," he said gently. "I need to say this. Those 3 days, I tortured myself, played out every scenario, what I'd say, how you'd react, whether you'd even want to see me. And then I realized it didn't matter. Even if you slammed the door in my face, I had to try, because the alternative was losing you forever, and I couldn't do that." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you'd killed your father," she said. "That was cruel and wrong, and I've hated myself for it every day since. We both made mistakes. But mine was worse," Eleanor insisted. "You were trying to protect your father. I was trying to hurt you. There's a difference." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I show you something?" He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. When he found what he was looking for, he turned the screen toward Eleanor. A little girl with curly dark hair, and Marcus's eyes smiled at the camera. She was holding the stuffed bear Eleanor had made. "That's Sarah," Marcus said softly. "Your granddaughter." Eleanor felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself in the same moment. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She looks like you," Marcus said. "Has your smile." Eleanor couldn't stop staring at the photo. "When can I meet her?" "Whenever you want. She's been asking about you. She knows about me." "Of course. I've told her about her grandma, who makes things with her hands and who's the kindest person I know." Marcus paused. "I never stopped loving you, Mom. Even when I was angry. Even when I stayed away. You were always my mom." Eleanor started crying again. She seemed to be doing that a lot lately. "I never stopped loving you either," she said. "And I never stopped hoping you'd come back." They sat together, drinking tea, filling in the gaps of 2 lost years. Marcus told her about Sarah's mother, a woman named Jennifer, who he'd met through the club, about how they weren't together anymore but co-parented well, about how Sarah loved dinosaurs and refused to wear anything that wasn't purple. Eleanor told him about the long, empty days, about how she'd considered giving up, about how the bikers had arrived at exactly the right moment. "I was holding a bottle of pills when they knocked," Eleanor admitted. Marcus went pale. "Mom, I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't see a way forward anymore. And now," Eleanor looked at her son, really looked at him, at the man he'd become, the father he was. "Now I want to meet my granddaughter," she said. Now I want to be in her life, in your life, if you'll let me. Mom, of course. Marcus's voice was thick. That's all I've wanted. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I should probably go, Marcus said reluctantly. I need to check on Sarah, but can I come back tomorrow? Can I bring her to meet you? Please, Eleanor said. Please do. Marcus stood, but before he left, he pulled Eleanor into one more hug. I love you, Mom, he said into her hair. I love you too, baby. When he was gone, Eleanor sat alone in the kitchen. But this time, the solitude felt different. This time, she knew it wouldn't last forever. This time, she had something to look forward to. 2 weeks later, Eleanor's house was full of noise. Sarah ran through the rooms, her purple dress flying, the stuffed bear clutched in one hand. Grandma, Grandma, look. Eleanor turned from the stove where she was making soup, real soup this time with fresh vegetables and chicken that Marcus had brought. What is it, sweetheart? Sarah held up a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, all holding hands. That's you and Daddy and me, Sarah announced proudly. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. It's beautiful. Should we hang it on the fridge? Yes. They hung the drawing with a magnet, and Sarah beamed. Marcus watched from the doorway, smiling. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind. Marcus had helped Eleanor appeal the relocation order, not that it was still being enforced, but they wanted it officially revoked. Officer Jensen had testified on her behalf. Several townspeople had come forward to apologize. Linda Parker had not been one of them, but Eleanor found she didn't care. She didn't need Linda's approval. She had her family back. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Jack standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Just passing through, he said with a grin. Thought I'd check on you. Come in. We're just making lunch. Jack entered, and Sarah immediately attached herself to his leg. You're one of the motorcycle men, she declared. That I am, little miss. Do you know my daddy? Sure do. Your daddy's a good man. Sarah nodded seriously. I know. They ate lunch together, Eleanor, Marcus, Sarah, and Jack. It felt like family. Afterward, Jack pulled Eleanor aside. You doing okay? He asked quietly. Better than okay, Eleanor said honestly. Better than I've been in years. Good. That's real good. Jack smiled. You know what you did helping us that night? It started something. The club's been talking about setting up a program. Checking in on elderly folks who live alone, making sure they're okay, helping with repairs, that kind of thing. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. That's wonderful. It was your idea, Jack said. You just didn't know it. I didn't do anything special. That's where you're wrong, ma'am. You did something most people are too scared to do. You saw people who needed help, and you helped them. No questions, no judgment, just kindness. Jack's eyes were serious. That's revolutionary. Before Eleanor could respond, Sarah called out, Grandma, can you teach me to sew? Of course, sweetie. Eleanor spent the afternoon teaching her granddaughter how to thread a needle, how to make simple stitches. Sarah's fingers were clumsy, but she was determined. What should we make? Sarah asked. What would you like to make? Sarah thought hard. Another bear. For kids who are sick like the little girl my daddy's friends helped. Eleanor looked at Marcus, who was watching them with soft eyes. I think that's a wonderful idea, Eleanor said. They worked together, Sarah's small hands guided by Eleanor's weathered ones. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt useful, felt needed, felt alive. That evening, after Marcus and Sarah had gone home with promises to return, soon Eleanor sat on her porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about James, about how he'd told her to keep living. I'm trying, she whispered to the sky. I'm really trying. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter and smiled. In the distance, she heard the rumble of motorcycles. The club was passing through again, probably heading to their next charity event. She waved even though they probably couldn't see her. They waved back anyway. Eleanor sat there until the stars came out. She wasn't alone anymore. She'd never really been alone. She'd just forgotten how to see the people who cared, but she saw them now. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Sometimes kindness comes in leather jackets and thundering engines. And sometimes the life we save by helping others is our own.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.